Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in for Richard French. The pick is in and now it is game on. In the Rose Garden this morning, President Obama nominated Judge Merrick Garland for the U.S. Supreme Court. Now things get thorny. Republicans aren't budging in their vow to stonewall the president. They're still refusing to even consider anyone until after the election. So the stalemate continues for now. Bazi Kanani is live outside the Supreme Court with more. Good evening, Bazi.
Good evening. Some Republicans accuse the president of picking Judge Garland only to pressure them to confirm a nominee. But the White House says Judge Garland was absolutely the president's first choice.
Today I am nominating Chief Judge Merrick Brian Garland to join the Supreme Court.
As promised, the president announces his Supreme Court pick, an emotional moment for 63-year-old federal appellate judge Merrick Garland, his family nearby as he accepts the honor.
It's also the greatest gift I've ever received, except, and there's another caveat, the birth of our daughters, Jessie and Becky.
President Obama pointed out Garland has a long history of bipartisan support. He called on the Senate to hold hearings and a vote instead of tying the nomination to election year politics.
To go down that path would be wrong. It would be a betrayal of our best traditions.
But Republican leaders are standing firm in opposition, insisting voters should decide the ideological balance of the court when they elect the next president.
It is the president's constitutional right to nominate a Supreme Court justice, and it is the Senate's constitutional right to act as a check on a president and withhold its consent.
Democrats are pushing back, hoping the choice of a judge considered a moderate will convince Republicans to rethink their position.
I hope that President Obama's nomination of an exceptionally qualified and consensus nominee will persuade Senate Republicans to change course.
Even some of the Republicans who supported Garland in the past say this time is different, and some say he will not be confirmed, so they won't even bother to hold a meeting with him. On Capitol Hill, Bazi Kanani, ABC News. Back to you.
All right, Bazi, thank you very much. As for the politics, a short time ago, I spoke with the Washington Post's David Farenthold about the politics surrounding the Garland nomination. David, first we had a vacancy, now we have a nominee. It's Merrick Garland. Does his nomination lead to any changes in the GOP roadblock for the nomination process in the Senate?
It's sort of too early to tell. Obviously, Garland was chosen both because he's a well-liked and long-serving judge, but also because he has particular partisan advantages. If he is going to be blocked by the Republicans, the Democrats now have sort of a good talking point. This is a guy who's seen as middle of the road, lots of experience working for Republicans. He will be an especially sort of embarrassing person to block. That's the logic, at least.
Roadblock from Republicans. We're not going to vote on him. We're not going to meet him. We're not even going to consider the nomination or have hearings. Any elements of those beginning to erode? Are we hearing about Republicans who actually will meet with him?
There's been a few people today who've been signaling that they will meet with him. And this is somebody who was approved by the Senate in 1997 when he first joined the D.C. Appeals Court. And some of the same senators are still in the Senate now. I think you're seeing a lot of pressure put on people like Chuck Grassley, who hasn't said he'll meet with him, the head of the Judiciary Committee, who's running for re-election in Iowa this year. There's going to be a lot of pressure on these folks not to look ridiculous or not to look sort of too rigid. So you'll see some people saying they'll meet with him. The problem is if you meet with him, then why don't you consider him? If you consider him, why don't you approve him? So there's a slippery slope here that I think Mitch McConnell, in particular, the head of the Republicans in the Senate, would like to see none of those senators even start to go down.
One of the arguments we've heard in support of Garland's nomination is the argument, well, he would be approved given his record under normal circumstances. Any indication that that argument is having any resonance in the Capitol?
I think it will. It's sort of too early to say now, but I think it will. I think that, this is somebody that is chosen sort of precisely because he wouldn't have a difficult, if he came to a hearing before the Judiciary Committee in the Senate and they did this sort of, familiar kind of examination of his record and his tendencies and why did you vote this way on that, there's not somebody who's going to have to defend a very liberal record. So I think that would be a very easy confirmation hearing as compared to the ones for Sotomayor and Kagan. The question is whether he'll actually even get to that point.
The threat from Republicans to block the nomination has widely been seen as both a way to rally their base, but also respond to a threat from the base. They don't want to open themselves up to primary challenges, especially those senators who are up this year and in potential swing states for the Senate. Is there any indication that maybe after the primary season closes, they might be more amenable to considering the nomination?
That's certainly possible. I mean, the thing you have to remember here is that for Republicans, it's not just about primary challenges. This is about the future of the court itself. We're talking about losing one of the most conservative justices and replacing him with, even if you believe Garland is sort of on the center, maybe a little bit to the left, you're shifting the whole geography of the court to the left by removing sort of this hard right member in Scalia. So approving anyone that Obama chooses is going to be seen as a disaster for the Republicans because it'll change the shape of the court for 10 or 20 years to come. That said, if you get to a place after Hillary Clinton wins or maybe after Donald Trump wins in their lame duck session after the general election, you could see this Republican senator saying, well, listen, he's the best we're going to get for a while. Let's just approve him.
You mentioned the pressure that's being brought to bear on Chuck Grassley. Is that essentially the strategy the Democrats are going to go through here? Focus on those senators who are up, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Wisconsin, a few more, try to get them to tip in favor of at least considering the nomination and hope that there's enough of a dam break that the full Senate has to hear it?
I mean, that's certainly possible. They're going to try to do that. That's the strategy they're going to say they're carrying out. I think they would be also very happy if Garland doesn't get confirmed before the general election, but they can beat a lot of these shaky Republican senators, people like Grassley in Iowa, Toomey in Pennsylvania. This is going to be a difficult year for Republican Senate candidates no matter what, just because of the nature of the states that are in play and also because they may be running with Donald Trump at the head of the ticket. So the Democrats would like to use this as sort of another weapon in those races. Of course, they'd take a Supreme Court nomination confirmation if they could get it.
And David, you mentioned that Garland is seen as a center or slightly center-left candidate, certainly not of the same ilk as Sonia Sotomayor or Elena Kagan. Are we getting any sense maybe in private circles from blowback from the left that maybe this isn't the kind of nominee that Democrats were hoping for?
Certainly. I think you see people on the left saying that. But I think in this case, liberal interests would be well served by him getting on the court just because, as I said, he would shift the balance of the court decidedly to the left by replacing Scalia and not having it stay at 4-4. But yes, certainly there's people who were saying they wish that it had been somebody else, somebody more liberal. But in this case, it's any kind of confirmation of Garland would still be a huge victory for liberal groups.
And finally, David, what's a time frame that we might be able to use as a good barometer for whether there's any progress on the Democratic side in terms of breaking this logjam from Republicans?
I think you'll see it in the next couple of months. The weird thing is going to be the interplay between this and the fight against Trump or the fight for Trump. There's two sort of battles for the soul of the Republican Party going on. This is related to that. Specifically, it's related to the battle between, is Obama so bad that Republicans can only block him, that there's no way to work with him or to sort of legislate when he's the president? If you take that attitude, that's sort of the more Donald Trump version of what a Republican is. The party has to settle on how it views that sort of central question. How do you deal with legislating and governing with Obama or any Democrat as the president? They're going to be fighting about that in the context of Donald Trump and in the context of this over the next couple of months.
And people say there's no drama in politics. David Fahrenthold with the Washington Post. Thanks very much, David.
Thank you.
President Obama chooses his nominee. Now the political fighting begins. Our political power panel is here to hash it out, including an attorney who's argued before the high court.